Welcome to Travel with Ketan with me, Ketan Joshi, biker, backpacker, and travel writer. As you know, I am the author of the 3 Men on Motorcycle series, where three crazy guys, me, Delzad, and Adi, the three amigos, we ride to various parts of India on our Royal Enfield motorbikes. Today we are doing a reading from my second book, 3 Men Ride Again, the Amigos Ride to Spiti. Till now on this ride, we have been along the Satluj Valley, we have crossed and gone to the Baspa Valley, we are staying in the village of Sangla, and today we will be doing the most exciting part, Sangla to Kalpa. 3 Men Ride Again. Talk, talk, talk. Talk, talk, talk. I rolled over and tried to snatch back the blanket of sleep. उठो रे! उठो रे! Talk! उठो रे! Talk! I got up with a jerk, as did Adi and Delzad. There was a crow in the windowsill glaring at us. Delzad gashed with fear and fell off the bed with a clump. Thump. What? उठो रे! Wake up! Get up! उठो रे! The crow's eyes went red. It was desperately pecking away at that window. I can't see! Adi screamed from his bed. I have gone blind! What has happened to me? I knew I should listen to that priest in school. That thing causes blindness and teeth and hair to fall out. Shut up! Yes, ma'am. Your hair has fallen over your eyes. Adi pushed his shaggy locks aside and blinked. I can see! I can see! Oh, the world is so beautiful. Shut up! Yes, ma'am. Wake up and get moving! Go to Rakcham! Go to Chitkul! Get out of the room! Caw! Caw! And the crow flapped off, giving us a last baleful look. We got ready and enjoyed a cup of tea on the balcony of the hotel. You know, you are really late on a ride when the hotel staff has actually woken up and the kitchen has started and they can give you a cuppa. Ideally, you should be out at first light before the hotel staff has woken up so that you can really enjoy the early morning freshness of the ride. From the balcony, we saw a village procession arrive. A bunch of villagers were out. Some guys banging on drums, some blowing horns, some making assorted noises, pa pa, poo poo, dong dong. And in the middle of the group, some guys were carrying a palki as we call it, on their shoulders. And they're all dressed in their best clothes. It was looking very festive indeed. Hey, what's going on, bro? I asked the hotel guy. And he told me that it was the occasion of the annual outing of the gods of the village temple. They would place the gods in a palanquin and carry it around the village so that everyone can see them. And sometimes they carry it all the way to the next village, to the temple in the next village for a few days. Yeah, I nodded. It's a pretty common thing. And I always thought of it as a pleasant picnic for the gods. It must be doing good for them to get out of that stuffy temple once a year. We suited up and got on the bikes and as usual reveled in the joy of the first kick in the morning. This was better than coffee. By the power of Grayskull! I shouted. Oh, fuck off, Delzad said and groomed off. Some people have no sense of the romantic, I thought sadly, and I roomed off after it. Sangla Valley is the most beautiful place that you could ever see. It's green and verdant and surrounded by imposing mountains, and you're following that Baspa river all through the journey. It was simply wonderful. The Baspa is still small and immature and almost childish in nature. It's not like the giant motherly rivers of the plains like the Ganga and the Yamuna, which flow placidly in their banks. Neither is it dangerous and scary like the wild mountain rivers, which look like a running witch with white hair streaming behind, which will kill you without a second thought if you fall into it. This river is like a small happy child, burbling and gurgling with the joy of living. It flows down the gentle slope of the valley and dances over the rounded stones in its bed. It sprays water playfully as it goes over boulders and you can see small fishes and insects playing in its lap. The water is so clear that it just invites you to sit on a rock by the riverside and dip your feet into it. And like a naughty child, it will splash you with water when you are not looking and run away laughing. The whole stretch from Sangladi to Chitkul is just like this. A little bit of paradise. You cross the villages of Batseri and Rakcham before you come to Chitkul. And strangely and interestingly, the best part is that there is nothing to see. No spots, no sights, no points, no temples, no forts, nothing. All you can see is the beauty of nature. Not the cold, forbidding, intimidating kind of nature that you will find in the brown Himalayas like Ladakh, but the green, welcoming nature of the Dhauladhars and the Shivaliks. There are pine-covered mountains on both sides of the road. The beautiful running river is running right by you, and the road is something out of a picture postcard. It's fantastic. I understood now why Bharti had come to wake us up early this morning. The distance from Sangladi to Chitkul was nothing. It was minuscule. But it was so beautiful that we kept stopping at various places and dismounting just to soak in the beauty of the road. Finally, we made it to Chitkul, the last Indian village before the Tibetan border. The metal road ended after that, and after that there are only walking paths. You could go on a trek to Kinnar Kailash or trek back to Sangla, or there's like n number of treks out there. You can trek wherever you want. Obviously, with these guys around, trekking was not an option. The road actually ended at a village settlement on the riverside, and the way to go there was to ride down one steep slope like this. So me and Adi lost our nerve completely and came to a complete halt. But Delza's eyes were shining with joy. Aha! What a lovely slope! Come, let's zoom down it. This from a guy whose leg was broken just 6 months back. He is still limping. I shook my head firmly. No. It would start with me on top of the bike and it would end with the bike on top of me. Ah, come on, it's just a slope. Delzad exhorted me. Nope. No guts. Nope. Are you a man or a mouse? Finally, Delzad had to take all 3 bikes down. He went down zoom on his bike and then walked back. Took my bike down. Zoom. And he started walking back. Wheeze, groan, gasp. And he saw that Adi had mustered up courage and bringing it down himself. He had no guts of coming down zoom like Del, but was gradually coming down like an inchworm. Occasionally, he let go of the brake and the brake would move forward like an inchworm on steroid. And then Adi would squeal in terror and stamp on the brake, and the bike would fishtail wide. Delzad was very pissed. Bastard! Why did you make me climb so much if you're going to come down yourself? He growled, clutching at his ample sides. Ah! Save me! Delzad! Save me! Adi was screaming, I'm falling! I'm falling! Finally, we all got all of us down safely and we parked by the riverside. We chilled by the side of the river for some time, soaking in that beauty. It was magical. Magical, I tell you. It would have been lovely to go on a little trek. But getting these two guys to walk is like herding chickens. By the time I convince one, come here, let's go for a trek. Come here, it'll be good fun. And the other one flaps away. Once they caught the other one, convinced, come here, let's walk. No, let's walk. No, let's take the bike. No, let's walk. You'll find the first one has escaped and is clucking happily on top of a tree. And anyway, it is not practical idea to trek with all this biking gear. Helmet, so I dropped the idea and just chilled by the river. Finally, we went to a little hotel and had some tea. It had a long, big, very impressive menu. All kind of stuff from chicken tandoori to chicken manchurian to the works. I was looking at it. But the owner saw me looking and told me no use looking at that menu because all he had was Maggie. You could have Maggie. You could have Maggie. I had been flirting with the idea of staying there overnight, but this decided me. I hate Maggie. Delda and Adi and Delda love it. So it was better to leave before they found out. And anyway, it was too early in the day to wind up the ride. So we reluctantly suited up and bid goodbye to Chitkul. It was a real wrench to leave the place. Must come back here and stay for a while, do some trekking, write a book, paint. Must remember to bring some booze though. Too much of beauty and might fall after some time. We retraced our journey back to Sangla, and I was trying to go as slow as possible and soak in the beauty of that Baspa Valley. The real tribute to that place was that even Mr. Perpetual Motion was riding slowly and enjoying that place. We left Sangla Valley and again crossed the Karcham Bridge onto the National Highway. And again shuddered at the sight of that Baspa Valley dam. Ugh, what a environmental vandalism in that Karcham Wangtu project. What eyesores. Especially after seeing the beauty of the Baspa, the sight of the dam was especially horrible. But that is a problem with all newly built stuff. Hopefully nature will heal the scars in due course of time and trees and bushes will grow again. And soon the river will fill that reservoir, overflow the dam and it will go back to being a normal river. And it will invigorate the downstream riverbed. We are back on the highway now. Once it was called the Hindustan-Tibet Road. I told you earlier, you might remember. And that too has a fascinating history. This part is part of the Silk Road since ancient history, a route for travel and trade across the mountains. That you know the Silk Road, right? The two great ancient civilizations of Europe and China were separated by a whole lot of nothingness. And a lot of mountain deserts, Himalayas, Hindu Kush, Karakoram, etc., etc. And goods had to be carried across this path basically on foot. So by camel, men, mules, whatever. Apart from that, there's also trade between Tibet and India. Because Tibet had a lot of ores and mines and stuff, and India had obviously everything, right? Clothes, cloth, khana, pina, masalas, the works. And which also happened on this road, this Hindustan-Tibet road. And it was an extremely difficult road, navigable only on foot and by pack animals like mules. And traders brave enough to do it used to make a pretty penny. But by the 18th century, things began to change. The British had got a very strong foothold in India after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, when they conquered the Bengal mainland, and even more so after the Battle of Buxar, the following year, where they defeated the Mughal Empire and got a formal farman license to rule the Bengal and collect tribute. So they went from being traders to being tribute collectors, so in effect landowners. The Mughal Empire was dying, and the Maratha Empire, which would have been its logical successor, got a big blow, almost a death blow, after their loss in the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, where they got their asses kicked by Afghan raiders. It is very complicated. So the point being they lost the Third Battle of Panipat. So see the timeline: 1757 Plassey, 1758 Buxar, 1761 Panipat, and after that the British started expanding. They started fighting the Marathas. They had the Anglo-Maratha wars. Then Marathas had one crisis succession, and there was a bunch of Anglo-Maratha wars, and the Marathas lost the last Anglo-Maratha war in 1818. In this part of the world where we are right now, it used to be dominated by the Sikh Empire of Ranjit Singh. So after the Battle of Panipat, what happened was that the Afghans retreated with almost an equally bloody nose. They might have, technically won the battle, but they retreated with almost an equally bloody nose. Then Abdali died, Durrani died in due course of time. And in that power vacuum, what came up was the Empire of Ranjit Singh. The Sikh Emperor of Ranjit Singh based out of Lahore, and he controlled a very big stretch of territory in North India. Unfortunately, Ranjit Singh had no able successors, and after he died, within 10 years, within 10 years of Ranjit Singh dying, the Sikh Empire was no more. It came, so basically, there were like two Anglo Sikh wars in the 1840s, and the Sikh Empire was completely destroyed, and the British were firmly in control of the whole of India. They had defeated Mughals, they defeated Marathas, they defeated the Sikhs. So, within 100 years, 1757 to 1840s, the British were in charge of whole of India for the first time since the longest time. There's one guy in charge of the whole thing, and the British were now extremely concerned about the territorial expansion of the Russian Empire. So, if you see the map, you can see that the Russians had increased their empire from again within 50 to 100 years, from just Russia. They had taken over the east, the various khanates that comprised the east, and they were within a stone's throw of the British borders. And it required no great imagination to see that Russia might want to attack the greatest jewel of the British Empire by crossing the mountains. Russia was a bit late in the empire building game. So it had been started by Spain when they bankrolled Columbus, and Spain, as you know, controlled a lot of the Americas and a lot of the Far East. Then Portugal, then France and Britain got into the game, and Germany and Russia are two guys who never really got rolling in that empire building game. All they had was Alaska in the Americas, and the Tsar wanted to make up for lost time and make the Russian Empire as big as the British, as big as the British, French, and Spanish ones. Even tiny Portugal had huge colonies, and Russia felt very left out. The simplest way would be to just take a bit from someone else's plate, and it seemed to the British that India would be very tempting to Russia. This resulted in the first actual Cold War between Russia and the West, referred to by many as the Great Game, and they were very concerned about safeguarding the mountain frontiers of the Indian possessions. Therefore, they were keen to have control over Afghanistan to be a buffer against Russia, and this led to the Anglo-Afghan wars in the 1840s, the effects of which are still being felt today. The Soviet-Afghan war, then the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the 9/11 attacks, and then the US-Afghan war are all a direct descendant of the first Anglo-Afghan wars. Similarly, the British were quite concerned about Tibet and China as well. We think of Tibet now as a quiet and peaceful Buddhist meditation, monks chanting Om Mani Padme Hum kind of place. But at that time, it was a significant military power which used to go to battle with all its various neighbors, China, India, Bactrian Hill kingdoms, Khanates, everybody. And they used to have bloody wars and spill a lot of blood. Tibet obviously had a very huge border with India, and the British didn't want any funny stuff from Tibet or Tibet cozying up to Russia. Simla, as I mentioned earlier, was the summer capital of the British government. And Lord Dalhousie saw how close it was to the Tibetan border. There is frequent trade between the princely state of Rampur Bushehr and Tibet via the Shipki La Pass, and this comprised of small but high value goods such as precious stones, musk, high quality wool, dry fruits, borax, etc. And Dalhousie wanted in on his game as well. So he ordered the construction of a nice big road in place of the shitty little mule track of the time. This would make trade easier, make military intervention easier, and also open up the mountain area so that he'll be able to keep tabs on the Pasky Ruskies. Pasky Ruskies, isn't that good? So, the military commander of that time, Sir Charles Napier, must have had a nasty shock when he got the order. But he got straight to work by giving the work to someone else. He coolly took the lands from the various kings and princes who owned them, Patiala state, Baghat state, Kauntal state, etc., and told them that they had a great honors. They would be making the road for the British Empire at their own expense. Isn't that wonderful? But when the road got to the mountains, it required the expertise of the army engineers to build the roads. Dalhousie threw all the resources of the East India Company at it. And you should see the roads they have built. At some places, there was no room for a road. There was just a narrow lip, you know. The mule path was a narrow lip of a road across a steep mountainside. You will be like, and it was like, what do you do now? How do you expand this road? There is no mountain, right? So what to do? So they pioneered a whole new technique. It was called half tunneling, where they used dynamite to blast a road into the side of the mountain. Hats off to those guys. When they decided to build something, they really went all out. A lot of Gurkha soldiers lost their lives while building this road. And I'm sure that Dalhousie must have felt bad about it for a second or so. And then he must have taken another sip of whiskey and soda and shouted, Koi hai! And kicked his servant in the face. It took almost 40 years for this road to be made. And the whole of that region must have changed beyond all recognition after that road was built. Even now, it is quite a formidable route. And before that route would have been unreachable except by the most intrepid. The whole region must have been utterly cut off and isolated. And now it is open to the world. This Hindustan-Tibet road or NH22 or NH5, even now is a lifeline for that entire Kinnaur and Spiti region. But strangely, it was rarely used for the purpose it was actually built, to facilitate trade with Tibet. The British attacked Tibet in 1904, a very long and complicated story, when Colonel Francis' young husband invaded Tibet via Sikkim, a very long way off, and kicked ass all the way to Lhasa and fucked up the then Dalai Lama shit, and Tibet went into deep freeze. They were so scared that they banned all foreigners from entering and throttled all trade. And after the British Empire wound up in 1947, China, as in Mao's China, promptly seized the opportunity and invaded Tibet and took it over in 1951 and promptly brought down the bamboo curtain over the Tibet border with thud. Since then, China has been breathing down on everybody's neck and no land traffic is happening with Tibet anywhere. Tibet is basically screwed. The Indian government apparently opened up the road for trading with Tibet in 2004 after 1951 or 1961, even worse. That was the Indo-China War. And apparently there was an easing relations with China. And apparently a lot of Indian traders did go to Tibet for trading across the Shipkila. But I'm sure it's shut again now. There's nothing happening. We proceeded along this road, enjoying the amazing topography and views and the sight of the Satluj River below. And soon we were at Rekongpyo, the capital of the region. Kalpa is a sister city to Rekongpyo. So Rekong is right on the road and Kalpa is high up on the mountain. We went up to Kalpa and we found a nice hotel. It was cheap and it was comfortable. No, the views were comfortable. How can the views be comfortable? The views were nice and it had a parking lot and a nice view. What more can one ask for? We stripped off. We took off our riding gear, forwards. And we relaxed with a chai and later went to explore the town of Kalpa. There was an ancient temple there. It was empty. The gods were gone. Gone? Where are they gone? Oh, they have just been taken to another village temple for some time, the local explained. We do this every year. Oh yeah, the picnic of the gods. We all need a summer holiday. And that's it for this chapter. Check out my website www.ketanjoshi.net for all the photos and write-ups on this book. Check out this book and all my other books on Amazon. If you would prefer to listen to this stuff while reading, while running, jogging, driving, etc., I got a nice podcast. Check that out. The link is in the description below. And if you would like a free copy of this book, the link for that is in the description below as well. So see you next time when we are actually entering the Spiti Valley for the first time. It's going to be a great adventure. Don't miss it. Subscribe, like, share. Cheers, guys.
एनफील्ड बुलेट गजब की सवारी।